Have you ever said, I disagree in a meeting and watched everyone's face just freeze? The temperature drops and people start to get defensive. Perhaps maybe your relationship with your colleague has completely changed forever. What if I told you that there's a way to completely change someone's mind and be more persuasive without actually making them feel attacked? In fact, they'll probably actually thank you for it as well. I've used this strategy in a lot of my negotiations and also to stop terrible strategies before they've even started and build a reputation as someone who people actually want to hear from in meetings. We call this the Irish method of disagreement, and in today's video, I'm about to show you exactly what we mean when we say this. I'm Dino, I'm your English teacher and the go-to for all things Ireland and Irish culture. And in today's video, I'm going to outline 7 phrases that you can use that can really help you to politely and also assertively disagree with people, both in life and in the workplace. And by the end of this video, you'll never have to choose between speaking up and maintaining relationships ever again. So let's get into it. But just before we get into these specific phrases, we do have a saying in Ireland that I want to share with you, and it's all related to disagreement, which is you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. So in Ireland, business culture really reflects maintaining relationships rather than being right. And so this really is true. So basically the idea here is that it's better to be a little bit more polite in terms of disagreeing with people rather than trying out to spite them or hurt somebody. But we do firmly disagree when necessary, but we do it in a way that preserves respect and keeps the door open for future collaborations. However, this is different from other cultures where we see in other cultures there might be more direct or they might prefer to say things more black and white. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Won't being too polite seem weak or innocent? Actually, no, the opposite is true. And I'll prove it to you today. The phrases that I'm about to teach you today, I teach all of my students in our group and one-on-one sessions with all of my clients here and abroad. The reason why I love them is that they allow you to disagree, but they also allow you to keep the door open for future opportunities and collaboration as well of working together. These phrases and techniques are what make Irish executives and negotiators so successful in the global business culture. So let's get into the first phrase. The first phrase you have to know is, I see where you're coming from, but. This here is your softest level of disagreement. It acknowledges the other person's perspective, and then it allows you to introduce your point. The key here is the phrase, I see where you're coming from. This allows you to be almost on the same page as the other person. It also validates their thinking process, even if you actually disagree with their conclusion. Here's how it sounds in practice. So your colleague might say, I think we should launch the product next month. And here's what you could say. I see where you're coming from, but I'm wondering if we might need a bit more time for quality testing. What do you think? Notice 3 things about this phrase. First, you acknowledge their logic before you disagree. Second, you're framing your disagreement as a wondering or a question rather than just a statement. And third, you're ending with, what do you think? Which invites dialogue rather than a heated debate. This phrase works perfectly when the disagreement is minor, you're talking to someone senior to you, you want to introduce doubt without causing defensiveness, and the relationship matters more than being right. Particularly, I would say, in Irish culture, this is your starting point for any disagreements. That brings us on to the second phrase, which is, that's one way of looking at it, certainly. Now, this phrase is brilliant because it technically agrees while opening space for disagreement. The word certainly confirms their perspective is valid, but the pause after it signals that you have something to add yourself. And here it is in action. So again, your colleague might say, we should cut the marketing budget to save costs. And you might say, that's one way of looking at it, certainly. Though I'm thinking we might actually need to increase marketing to drive the revenue we're after. The beauty of this phrase is in what's not said. So by calling their idea one way of looking at it, you're implicitly or you're suggesting that there are other ways, including your way, that you would suggest. The pause after certainly is crucial. And in Irish communication, that pause signals, I've acknowledged your point, and now I'm going to offer a different perspective. So this works particularly well when someone has presented an idea as if it's the only option, but we know it's not. Another option would be you need to introduce alternative thinking, or you're in a group setting and you don't want to seem confrontational, or you want to broaden the discussion rather than narrowing it. The key here in delivering this phrase is your tone. My advice would be to keep it thoughtful and sincere and not sarcastic. If you found value in these two phrases already, be sure to subscribe, share with someone who's also learning English, and don't forget to hit that little notification bell as it does help the YouTube algorithm send and push all of my latest video updates to you. So without further ado, let's move on to phrase number 3. And phrase number 3 is, I'd have a slightly different take on that. Now we're moving into slightly firmer disagreement territory here, but this phrase clearly signals, even if you disagree, the word slightly softens it. Again, there's a pattern here with this Irish disagreement, which is we might disagree, but in quite a softer way than other countries or cultures. So even if your take is completely different, saying slightly gives everyone room to save face. So let's see it here in context. Now, your manager might say, the problem is our team isn't working hard enough. And you could say, I'd have a slightly different take on that. From what I'm seeing, the issue might be more about unclear priorities that we're setting rather than effort levels. Notice how this works. So you're directly contradicting their analysis, but the phrase structure makes it feel like the perspective shift rather than a personal attack at that person. So the phrase I'd have instead of I have also softens it by making it a conditional and personal more so to you. This phrase is perfect when you are disagreeing with an analysis or a diagnosis from somebody. Also, if you're offering a fundamentally different perspective altogether, or situations where you have data or evidence to support your view. Key point here is make sure you have that data and make sure your data is correct. And lastly, when you need to redirect a conversation that's going in the wrong direction. So in Irish business meetings, you'll hear this phrase used constantly. It's how we say you're wrong without actually saying you're wrong. Moving on to phrase number 4, which is I'm not entirely convinced that. Now, this phrase is more direct while still maintaining politeness. Not entirely convinced signals clear skepticism or you're unsure about something, but without being too confrontational. So the genius is in entirely. It suggests that you might be partially convinced, but it keeps the other person from being too defensive. Here's how it works in a real situation. So your colleague might say, everyone loves this new design, and you actually disagree with that, and you know that not everyone loves this design. So you could say, I'm not entirely convinced that our target demographic will respond to it. Have we done any user testing with that age group or with that demographic? Now, this phrase accomplishes several things. It clearly states your disagreement, it introduces doubt without any aggression, and invites evidence to support their claim, and positions you as a thoughtful rather than negative. So it really considers you as you're thinking rather than just saying that they are negative completely. I would suggest using this phrase when another person or group of people, their claims are being made without any evidence, and you have specific concerns about an approach, or the stakes are high enough that politeness shouldn't override accuracy. So, for example, if there's a big merger or there's any contract details that need to be settled, this is a great phrase to use. Also, if you want to slow down a decision that's maybe moving too fast, and you might be worried that others may not have considered certain factors that you are currently thinking of. Notice how following up with the question is crucial in this phrase. It turns that disagreement into productive inquiry rather than just the opposition. The next phrase then is phrase number 5, which is I'd have to push back on that a bit. Now we're starting to come into firmer disagreement territory here. Pushback is direct language, but a bit, and I'd have to soften it enough to maintain that professionalism. So this phrase signals I'm about to disagree strongly, but I do have good reason. Let's have a look and see how it works in real life. So an executive from your company might say, we should eliminate customer service departments to cut costs. But you actually disagree with this. And here's what you could say. I'd have to push back a bit on that. Our customer retention data shows that service quality directly correlates with renewal rates. Cutting that department could cost us more in lost revenue than we'd actually save. The phrase structure does something very important here. I'd have to. This clause or this part of the phrase suggests that you're compelled by logic or evidence to disagree. So it's not personal preference. Push back, this part of the phrase, actually is clear language that signals the firm disagreement. A bit maintains that diplomatic softness that us Irish love, and even if you're trying to be direct, it's still doable. So this phrase is appropriate when the proposed action could have serious or negative consequences and you want to just stop the idea happening right away, or you have strong evidence to support your position, or someone needs to be the voice of reason in the room and you are that person. So don't be afraid to speak up, or even if the cost of being wrong is too high, to stay silent. Now, in Irish business culture, this phrase signals that you're willing to potentially create some tension because you know that the issue matters that much. All right, so that brings us then to our next phrase, which is phrase number 6. We'd want to be careful with that approach. Now, this sounds like it may be a little bit direct, but it's distinctly Irish in the way of expressing strong concern while maintaining that relationship harmony. We'd want to be careful is a gentle way of saying this could go terribly wrong or it could go very badly wrong. Let's take a look at how it's used in context. So, a team member or a colleague might say, let's promise the client we can deliver in 2 weeks. Now, realistically speaking, you know that there's no chance that that can actually happen. So here's what you could say. We'd want to be careful with that approach. If we overpromise and underdeliver, we could damage the entire relationship. What if we said 3 weeks and then impress them by an early finish? So here you're giving them bigger target and then allowing for that early finish. It allows them to be much more impressed than if you had just said 2 weeks and finished on time. So this phrase works really well because it uses we instead of you, making it more collaborative rather than blaming the other person. And want to be careful implies that risk without sounding too dramatic. It also positions you to protect the team and company, not opposing the other person. So I would suggest using this when someone is about to make a very risky decision in your department or in your company, and you need to introduce caution without seeming too negative, or the relationship matters with that person long term, or even if you want to redirect without actually embarrassing that person. This is one of the most common phrases in Irish business conversations because it balances firmness with kindness. And so you hear a lot of executives directly using this because it's a great way for us to put a pause on things and really focus on where we're actually going with the decisions that we're making. Lastly, this brings us to phrase number 7. This here is the strongest disagreement that you'll hear from Irish people being used in the workplace. And that is, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think that's the right call. Now, we hear this being used quite often, particularly if we want to be strong, direct, and assertive. So it is going to be your strongest, most direct disagreement phrase while maintaining professionalism. I'm going to be honest with you here. This signals what I'm about to say is important and it's direct. Also, I don't think that's the right call is as close to saying you're wrong without actually saying you're wrong. Here's when and how to actually use it. And if you found value in this, be sure to save this video for later because it will come in handy the next time you're in the workplace and you're trying to get some tips and advice about how to disagree. So let's say, for example, someone senior in your company says, we're moving forward with this merger next month, but you're in a position to give your advice and you've been asked to speak up. So you could say something like, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think that's the right call given the financial data that we have just received. I believe we need to pause and reassess before making this decision. So this phrase, it should be reserved only for these high stakes situations where being wrong has serious consequences. So it's important that you speak up and take the assertiveness to do so. Also, when you have strong evidence or expertise supporting your position. Also, this might be used for moments where diplomatic disagreement hasn't worked. So you need to be that little bit more direct. And also in times when clarity is more important than comfort. So even with this direct phrase, notice that it's still structured respectfully. And that's the key thing that I teach all of my students is that we can be direct and we can disagree with people, but it's important to do that in a respectful way. So you're framing this phrase as it's a professional opinion, or you're explaining your reasoning, or even that you're not really attacking the person, but you're just disagreeing with their decision. So this is really how Irish people and Irish executives will disagree when something really matters. And you'll notice that they're not afraid to do so as well. So now you have 7 practical phrases for polite disagreement organized from the softest or the most gentle to the most direct or the strongest. Here's how to use them effectively. Always start gentle and begin with phrases 1 or 2 and only escalate if you need to. Match the stakes of the situation. So minor disagreements deserve those more gentle phrases, whereas the major issues deserve more firmer ones because you know that there's a lot at stake, right? Another thing to consider here would be the relationship with the other person or the other people. So with senior leaders or new relationships, Stay in the gentle to moderate range. Also, provide reasoning. In Ireland, disagreement works because we always explain our thinking. And finally, end with a dialogue. So follow up your disagreement with a question or an invitation to discuss it further. Again, notice how we're always leaving the door open. Remember that the Irish approach isn't about avoiding conflict, but it's about managing it productively. So these phrases let you stand your ground while keeping your relationships intact, hopefully. Again, like I tell all my students, that practice makes perfect. So the best way to do it is to start using these phrases as soon as possible. Don't wait until next week or next month. When you have that chance and you've been asked to speak up, or if you know you should speak up, start using these phrases. Now, here's your challenge. This week, try using one of these phrases in real business situations. Pay attention to how people respond compared to direct disagreement. I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments, either good or bad. Again, never be afraid to make a mistake because that's exactly how we learn. And in addition, I had a question this week, which was, how do I improve my English? I get this question all the time. And one of the key points that I suggested was, when we do make mistakes, don't be afraid to record those mistakes. What went wrong? And I would say the same for these phrases. And in this video, if you do use these phrases, and perhaps maybe mistakes are made or things didn't go as planned, don't be afraid to record them. What exactly happened? Write it down. And if you want more Irish business strategies and phrases just like this, don't forget to subscribe, hit that little notification bell. And remember, in business, disagreement is inevitable. But in these videos, I plan to give you phrases, strategies, tips, and pieces of advice that can allow you to disagree and allow you to gain that confidence in order to speak up in everyday situations. That's what separates good communicators from great ones as well. All right, thanks for watching. And remember, you can be both honest and kind. That's the Irish way. Or at least I like to think it is. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next video.